For the first time in decades, a British aircraft carrier sailed into the Indo-Pacific with F-35 stealth fighters on its deck, American destroyers in its escort, and a message that Britannia still rules strategic waterways from the South China Sea to the Persian Gulf. The HMS Queen Elizabeth represents Britain's most ambitious naval project since World War II, but can two aircraft carriers and a shrinking fleet truly revive the Royal Navy's global reach, or are we witnessing the final gasp of a once dominant maritime power? The answer will determine whether Britain remains a serious military force in the 21st century or fades into strategic irrelevance. Welcome to the Doctrine of War. Today we're examining the most controversial question in British defense circles: whether the Queen Elizabeth-class carriers represent a strategic masterstroke that restores British naval power or a catastrophically expensive mistake that's draining resources from the rest of the fleet. We're talking about 65,000-ton warships carrying cutting-edge stealth fighters, operating with NATO allies from the Arctic to the Pacific, and projecting British power in ways not seen since the Falklands War. But we're also talking about a Royal Navy that's shrunk to just 75 vessels, that's struggling to crew the ships it has, and that faces budget constraints that threaten its ability to maintain global presence. This is the story of ambition meeting reality, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The carrier gamble, Britain's bet on power projection. Let's start with what makes the Queen Elizabeth-class carriers genuinely impressive and why they represent such a dramatic statement about British strategic ambitions. These are not small ships trying to punch above their weight. These are proper supercarriers, the largest warships ever built for the Royal Navy, and they're designed to go toe-to-toe with anything except American Nimitz and Ford-class carriers. HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales each display 65,000 tons fully loaded, measure 280 meters in length, and can carry up to 40 aircraft including F-35B Lightning II stealth fighters, Merlin helicopters, and potentially future unmanned combat air vehicles. The flight deck is 70 meters wide with a distinctive twin-island design that separates navigation functions from air operations control. The ski jump ramp allows short takeoff for heavily loaded F-35Bs carrying weapons and fuel, maximizing aircraft performance without requiring catapults or arrestor gear. The power plant consists of 2 Rolls-Royce Marine Trent gas turbines and 4 diesel generators producing 109 megawatts of power, giving the ships a top speed exceeding 25 knots and a range of 10,000 nautical miles. These carriers can sustain operations at sea for extended periods, projecting power across vast ocean areas that smaller carriers cannot effectively cover. The crew complement is roughly 1,600 including aircrew, with accommodation for an additional 900 personnel when operating as a flagship or amphibious command platform. The F-35B integration is what makes these carriers genuinely lethal. Britain has committed to purchasing 138 F-35Bs for the Royal Air Force and Royal Navy, with operational deployments building toward the goal of embarking 24 to 36 fighters per carrier during wartime operations. The F-35B brings 5th-generation capabilities, stealth, sensor fusion, advanced electronic warfare and precision strike, that no previous British carrier aircraft possessed. When a Queen Elizabeth-class carrier operates with a full air wing, it represents more strike power than most nations' entire air forces. If you're beginning to see why the Queen Elizabeth-class carriers represent a pivotal moment for British naval power and global influence, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We're breaking down the defense decisions that will define whether Britain remains a major military power, and your support keeps this analysis coming. The strategic rationale behind these carriers reflects Britain's post-Brexit vision of global Britain, a nation that uses military power, diplomatic influence, and economic partnerships to maintain relevance far beyond European shores. The carriers enable Britain to project power into regions where British interests are threatened, to support NATO operations from the Mediterranean to the North Atlantic, and to demonstrate commitment to Indo-Pacific security at a time when China is challenging the rules-based order. The 2021 deployment of HMS Queen Elizabeth to the Indo-Pacific was the proof of concept. The carrier strike group included Royal Navy destroyers and frigates, a Royal Fleet Auxiliary Support Ship, an American destroyer, and a Dutch frigate, demonstrating the integrated multinational operations that define modern naval warfare. The strike group transited through the South China Sea, conducted exercises with Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and India, and sent an unmistakable message to Beijing: Britain is back in the Pacific and will contest Chinese attempts at regional hegemony. The political impact of that deployment exceeded its military significance. For the first time since the Hong Kong handover in 1997, Britain demonstrated the capability and will to operate militarily in East Asian waters. The Royal Navy conducted freedom of navigation operations in disputed waters, exercised with regional partners who welcomed British presence as a counterweight to China, and proved that European naval powers can contribute to Indo-Pacific security despite geographic distance. The carrier construction program itself was a triumph of British shipbuilding and industrial capability. Both ships were built in sections across multiple UK shipyards and assembled at Rosyth in Scotland, employing thousands of workers and demonstrating that Britain retains the industrial capacity to construct capital warships. This is not trivial. Many countries have lost their shipbuilding capability and can no longer construct large naval vessels domestically. Britain proved it still possesses this strategic capability. Interoperability with American forces is a crucial force multiplier. British carriers are designed to embark U.S. Marine Corps F-35BS and operate integrated with American carrier strike groups. During exercises, British carriers have hosted American aircraft, British pilots have launched from American carriers, and the two navies have demonstrated seamless coordination. This interoperability means that in any major conflict, Royal Navy carriers can augment American naval power and contribute to coalition operations in ways that smaller Allied navies cannot. The technology innovations incorporated into Queen Elizabeth-class carriers include advanced computer systems, sophisticated radar and electronic warfare suites, and design features that reduce radar cross-section and improve survivability. While not stealthy like a submarine, these carriers incorporate features that make them more difficult to detect and target than previous generation carriers. The twin island design also provides redundancy. If one island is damaged, the ship can continue operations from the other. Aviation support infrastructure is world-class. The carriers include aircraft maintenance facilities, weapons magazines, fuel storage, and aviation spare parts storage that allow extended operations without requiring frequent replenishment. The flight deck can sustain high sortie rates with multiple aircraft launching and recovering simultaneously, generating the combat power needed to support major operations. The command and control capabilities make these carriers ideal flagships for multinational operations. The ships include extensive communications equipment, planning facilities, and accommodation for command staff that allow them to coordinate complex operations involving multiple nations and services. When HMS Queen Elizabeth deployed to the Indo-Pacific, it served as the command platform for the entire carrier strike group, demonstrating Britain's ability to lead coalition operations. But here's where reality invades ambition. Two aircraft carriers, no matter how capable, cannot single-handedly revive the Royal Navy when the rest of the fleet has shrunk to historic lows. The Royal Navy currently operates approximately 75 vessels including surface combatants, submarines, amphibious ships, and support vessels. This is fewer ships than at any point since the early 18th century. Britain once ruled the seas with hundreds of warships. Now it struggles to maintain continuous carrier operations because it lacks sufficient escorts, support vessels, and crew to sustain deployments. The uncomfortable truth: carriers without a fleet. Now let's examine the uncomfortable realities that threaten to turn the carrier program from a strategic masterstroke into an expensive liability. The problem isn't the carriers themselves, it's everything else the Royal Navy needs to operate them effectively and defend them against modern threats. A carrier without adequate escorts, without sufficient aircraft, without proper support vessels, and without enough trained sailors is a very expensive target, not a strategic asset. Escort shortage is the most immediate problem. A carrier strike group requires destroyers and frigates to provide air defense, anti-submarine warfare, and surface combat capability that protects the carrier from threats. The Royal Navy operates 6 Type 45 destroyers with sophisticated air defense systems and 13 Type 23 frigates for anti-submarine and general-purpose missions. This sounds adequate until you realize that at any given time, several ships are in maintenance, others are conducting independent missions, and the Royal Navy has global commitments beyond just carrier escort. When HMS Queen Elizabeth deployed to the Indo-Pacific in 2021, the carrier strike group included just 2 Type 45 destroyers and 2 Type 23 frigates, supplemented by American and Dutch vessels to provide adequate protection. This reveals the fundamental problem. Britain cannot independently deploy and protect a carrier strike group without relying on Allied contributions. This isn't coalition warfare by choice, it's coalition warfare by necessity because the Royal Navy lacks sufficient ships. The Type 26 frigates being constructed to replace the Type 23s are excellent ships with advanced capabilities, but they're extraordinarily expensive and being built in small numbers. Britain is purchasing just 8 Type 26 frigates at costs exceeding £1 billion per ship. The Type 31 frigates meant to provide additional numbers are cheaper but less capable. The arithmetic is brutal. The Royal Navy is replacing 13 Type 23 frigates with 8 Type 20 SIXS and 5 Type 31s, maintaining the same total number but with less overall capability for routine presence missions. The submarine force faces similar constraints. Britain operates 7 Astute-class nuclear attack submarines, phenomenally capable boats that are among the quietest and most lethal in the world. But 7 submarines cannot maintain continuous deterrent patrols, protect carriers, conduct intelligence missions, and support amphibious operations simultaneously. The Royal Navy needs double this number to adequately fulfill its missions, but budget constraints make expansion impossible. The amphibious capability is being hollowed out. Britain is retiring HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, the Royal Navy's 2 amphibious assault ships, without replacement, eliminating the ability to conduct large-scale amphibious operations. The Royal Marines are being restructured toward raiding and special operations rather than conventional amphibious assault, reflecting the reality that Britain can no longer afford both carriers and amphibious ships. The Royal Fleet auxiliary support vessels are aging and insufficient in number. These unglamorous vessels carry fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts that keep the fleet operating at sea. Without adequate support ships, carriers must return to port frequently for replenishment, dramatically reducing operational effectiveness. The RFA is chronically underfunded and overworked, operating vessels well past their planned retirement dates because replacements haven't been funded. The crew shortage is perhaps the most critical problem. The Royal Navy is undermanned by thousands of personnel across all specialties. Ships sit pier-side not because they're broken but because there aren't enough sailors to crew them. Retention rates are declining as sailors leave for better-paying civilian jobs. Training pipelines are backlogged. The career path for naval officers has become less attractive as deployment tempos increase and quality of life decreases. You can build all the ships you want, but if you can't man them, they're useless. The aircraft numbers fall short of what's needed to fully exploit carrier capabilities. Britain plans to eventually operate 24 to 36 F-35Bs per carrier during high-intensity operations, but current procurement plans won't deliver sufficient aircraft to equip both carriers simultaneously at this level for at least another decade. The Royal Air Force and Royal Navy are competing for the same limited pool of F-35Bs, creating tensions about whether carriers or land bases receive priority for aircraft allocation. The budget constraints are squeezing every aspect of Royal Navy operations. Britain spends roughly 2.3% of GDP on defense, above the NATO minimum but still insufficient to fund all the capabilities the military requires. The carrier program consumed enormous resources during construction, and now operating these ships is consuming resources needed for other capabilities. The Royal Navy faces painful choices about which capabilities to retain and which to sacrifice. Industrial fragility threatens long-term sustainability. British shipyards operate at capacity building current orders but lack the surge capacity to rapidly expand production during crises. The supply chains for critical components increasingly depend on foreign suppliers, creating vulnerabilities during conflicts when supply chains might be disrupted. The workforce lacks the depth of experience that existed when Britain maintained larger naval construction programs. Political challenges compound military constraints. British governments of all parties have struggled to articulate a coherent defense strategy that matches ambitions to resources. Global Britain rhetoric promises worldwide engagement, but the forces allocated don't support sustained global presence. The carrier program has absorbed so much funding that other capabilities have been starved, creating an unbalanced force structure optimized for high-end carrier warfare but weak in other areas. The maintenance burden for 2 large carriers is proving more expensive than anticipated. These are complex ships with sophisticated systems that require frequent maintenance and occasional major refits. When one carrier is in extended maintenance, as is common for large warships, Britain effectively becomes a one-carrier navy, unable to maintain continuous carrier presence. The deployment cycle means that Britain can sustain one carrier at sea for perhaps 30 to 40% of the time, not the continuous presence that true carrier nations maintain. The threat environment has evolved in ways that make carrier operations more dangerous. Chinese anti-ship ballistic missiles, Russian submarine capabilities, and ubiquitous surveillance satellites mean that carriers operating in contested waters face threats that were marginal a generation ago. The Royal Navy must invest in sophisticated air defenses, electronic warfare, and anti-submarine warfare capabilities to protect carriers, but these investments compete with other priorities in a zero-sum budget environment. The strategic question becomes whether Britain should have prioritized differently. Could the Royal Navy have been more effective with more escorts, more submarines, and no carriers? Would a larger fleet of smaller ships provide more utility than two large carriers? These questions are ultimately unanswerable because they require counterfactual analysis of strategies not chosen, but they're worth asking because they force consideration of opportunity costs. The answer to whether HMS Queen Elizabeth can revive the Royal Navy is therefore complicated. The carrier itself is an impressive platform that enables power projection that Britain hasn't possessed in decades. It demonstrates British technological capability, industrial capacity, and strategic ambition. It provides options for intervention and deterrence that no other capability can match. In this sense, the carrier has already revived certain aspects of British naval power. But the carrier cannot overcome the fundamental constraint that the Royal Navy is too small to sustain global presence while adequately protecting and supporting carrier operations. The fleet needs simultaneous expansion across multiple categories, escorts, submarines, support vessels, and personnel, to truly revive British maritime power. The carriers are necessary but insufficient for revival. They're the spearhead, but a spearhead is useless without the shaft behind it. Britain faces a choice. It can commit the resources necessary to build the fleet that supports carrier operations, accepting the costs and trade-offs this requires. Or it can acknowledge that two carriers are aspirational symbols that cannot be fully exploited with current fleet size, and scale back ambitions to match resources. The worst outcome is the current situation, maintaining carriers at enormous expense while the rest of the fleet continues shrinking. The romantic notion is that Britain is reclaiming its naval heritage, restoring the prestige and power that made the Royal Navy the world's dominant maritime force for 2 centuries. The realistic assessment is that Britain is operating carriers at the edge of its capability, struggling to crew them, escort them, and sustain them in operations far from home. The gap between aspiration and capability is the central tension of modern British naval power. HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales are magnificent ships. They represent British engineering excellence, strategic vision, and commitment to remaining a serious military power. They enable operations that no other British platform can conduct. They demonstrate that Britain is willing to invest in power projection despite fiscal constraints. These are significant achievements that deserve recognition. But they're not enough to revive the Royal Navy alone. Revival requires comprehensive investment across the entire fleet, sustained political commitment through multiple governments, a coherent strategy that matches forces to ambitions, and most critically, enough ships and sailors to maintain presence in multiple theaters simultaneously. Britain has taken the first step by building the carriers. The question is whether it will take the subsequent steps necessary to build the fleet that makes those carriers truly effective. The answer will determine whether the Royal Navy remains a force that commands respect and influences events globally, or whether it becomes a boutique navy that can occasionally deploy impressive capabilities but lacks the sustained presence to shape strategic outcomes. The carriers alone cannot answer this question. They're a platform on which revival could be built, but only if Britain commits to building everything else required. The jury is still out. The ships are at sea. The question is whether the fleet follows. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. If this hard look at British naval power and the carrier program's strategic implications was valuable, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Drop your thoughts in the comments on whether Britain should invest more in escorts and support ships or whether the carriers alone justify their cost. Stay sharp, stay realistic, and we'll see you in the next one.